Hey, I'm Brian Trifon, also known as Trifonic, and I want to show you a tip about making ambient sounds. So one thing that might be obvious but never fails is a really long reverb. You can pretty much take any sound, even the worst sound you can find, and you put like a 20-second reverb on it, and it's fully wet, it's going to sound heavenly. So let's find the worst sound that we can possibly find in Logic's EXS24 sampler. So I'm going to load up on my instrument track here, EXS24. And if I go to the preset menu, that's right here, and we take a look under World, we go to European, we've got the Celtic tin whistle. So that's the sound from Titanic, the Titanic theme. I think, let's see, that kind of thing, right? So that's kind of a cheesy sound. So we can turn this into something that's actually quite compelling as an ambient pad by using Logic Space Designer. So if I go to the channel strip here, under Inserts, we've got Reverb and Space Designer. So I'll open up an instance of that. So if I just play it right now, we've got a 2-second reverb. It gives this Celtic tin whistle a little bit more sense of space, but we still have the cheese factor of the sound itself. So now let me crank up the length of this reverb. So right here it says length 2 seconds, and I can just drag up on this and increase the amount of time. I can go all the way up to 100 seconds, but that's ridiculously long. So let's get it in around 20 seconds, maybe a little less. 19, that's good. So now if I play, so we have the initial sound and then this really beautiful tail to it. So really I don't want the initial sound at all, I just want that tail. So I'm going to take the dry portion of the sound, that's this slider here, set it to 0, and I'll turn up the wet portion just a little bit more, just so we've got some level. So let's hear that. So that's really nice. And if you play some lower notes, it's actually a very compelling pad. You know, it has a lot of character to it. And the thing that's nice is once you actually have a reverb setting, you could go and change the sound that you have in the EXS24. Just experiment with different sounds and you'll get a range of interesting pads. So let's try that. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to something different. Let's hear what a marimba would sound like. So this is the marimba through the 20-second reverb. So that's also really nice, very introspective kind of sound. You know, good ambient sound. Now the thing that can happen with these really long reverbs is that you're going to have frequencies that ring out and that sometimes can muddy up the mix or just sound muddy even in isolation. Fortunately with Space Designer there's an EQ that's built into it. So typically what I do is just cut out some of the low frequencies in the reverb. So I use this low shelf right here and I'll just bring down the gain on this low shelf. Now let's hear that. So less of the low mids that are going to make it muddy. You know, of course it depends on the context as well. So if it might work in a track to have more low mids in it, but a lot of the time with a long reverb it can get really muddy. So that's one way that you can use effects and reverb to create a really nice ambient pad. You can also get a little bit more sophisticated with it as well. So on this next channel strip down here, I have an EXS24 and I have some steel drums. So here's what they sound like with no reverb. Now if I turn on Space Designer, I'll open it up so you can see. I've got an 18-second reverb here, a little bit of a low shelf. So even that on its own is quite a nice sound. The steel drum reverb is one of my favorite combinations. So a way that we can actually add a little bit more movement to this is to use a number of bus and aux channels with different effects and just layer it all together. So if we take a look at the mixer here, and I'll move this EXS24 out of the way, you can see I've got all these aux channels here that have different effects. So pitch shifted delay, distortion. This is essentially the dry signal with the mid sucked out of it. I've got an auto filter, some modulation. the vocal transformer, formant shift, and then the guitar amp effect, ring shifter. So you can see I've got a bunch of different parallel chains, and what I can do is send to those. So I'll turn on these buses here, and we can just hear what this all sounds like. I'll turn them all on, and then I can go through some of them. So here they are. Right. So this adds a lot more movement to the sound and layer as well. And what I can do is adjust the level, the amount that these buses, the amount that I'm sending to them, and that's going to adjust the amount of effects that I have as well. So maybe if I don't want all these effects, like I don't want this amp and ring shifter, what I can do is just bypass those buses. So if I option click on bus 7 and bus 8, so no more amp, no more ring shifter. Let's turn off a few of these other ones as well, and let's just see what it sounds like with a couple layers of effects. So that's quite nice. It's subtle, but it blends in really well with the original. And so if we take a look, one of the things that I think is really nice and that adds the sound is I have on this first bus here, so for bus 1, it's this pitch shifted delay. So I've got an EQ with a high pass filter, so I'm cutting out the low frequencies. And after that, that's followed by a pitch shifter. That is transposed by 7 semitones, so that's a perfect fifth. And then that's followed by a delay. So what that's doing is basically these echoes in this delay are shifted up a fifth. And you can kind of hear the artifacts of that mixed in here, and I think that adds a little something to it. If I turn off the pitch shifter, you can hear a slight difference. It'll be subtle. Right? So it's a little different. It just adds a little bit of harmony to it. And then you can hear that I've got some bit crush sounds in there on the next channel. So if I turn off the bit crusher, the high-end crunchiness goes away. Right. And you can also hear that on this bit crush distorted channel that it's panning back and forth. So what's creating that is just the tremolo effect in Logic. So if I open that up here, you can see it's basically tremolo, which is amplitude modulation. So the volume is fluctuating rhythmically, but the left and right channel are offset in their phase. So it makes it sound like it's panning back and forth. And see, when I play a note, you can hear it moving back and forth. So you can go as simple or as complicated as you want, adding layers of effects with different buses, and to get a really sophisticated sound. Another thing you could do is actually just turn off the channel's output so that you have no dry signal coming through, that you're only sending to these affected channels here. And for certain sounds, that will sound less muddy and is a good alternative. Sometimes it sounds good with it also being layered on top of the dry signal. But let's turn off the output here. So if I click on stereo output, set it to no output, let's hear what that's like. So it's similar, we just don't have that original layer in there. And this is probably a little less muddy, so this is actually maybe preferable for this particular sound. And then I can just adjust the levels on the actual aux channels here, or the amount sending into the buses, until I get a nice combination. So anyway, as you can see, reverb works wonders, and of course layering these various buses with effects can be a really nice way to add movement to your reverbed pad.